So I'd like to welcome everyone to the North American Expats in France third quarter financial forum. So this is the third time we've done this year. We're going to have another one in the fourth quarter. But today's session is how can I manage currency risks while living in France? So it's the first time we've approach this topic, and we have with us today Brian Dunhill from Dunhill International Financial Planners. Brian, you waved your hands. You could say hello, okay? And with Brian, next to Brian is Josh Madden.
Hello.
Hello, Josh. And Cam Samal, he's there on technical. And Anya Barazo is here with us. They're all from Dunhill Financial, and you see Patty Sadowska. She's on my team, and you might recognize her. So this session is being recorded. You will be able to rewatch it later on YouTube, and you can also send that link to your friends so that everyone can have an opportunity to discuss this topic. And we will have a Q&A at the end for about 20 minutes, I believe, or 15 minutes, depending on how long this goes. So hold your questions or write them in the chat box so that we can monitor those questions and get them answered in the meantime. So I'm just, here to say hello and to introduce these people and heckle along the way. And I'm going to let Brian Dunhill open this up.
So we're actually going to let Cam do a little bit of a poll. Thank you there, Adrian. That is a perfect intro, and I see that we've already got some Q&As in there that are perfectly on topic. So hopefully we'll be able to cover those in the presentation. But Cam, why don't you start off with those polls that you wanted to ask?
Yeah, let's. Which poll should we go for first, Brian?
Well, we're going to talk about currencies first. So why don't you ask your currency question?
Let's do that. There's a nice poll up there on everyone's screen, hopefully.
So let's give a little bit of background on this. Basically, we've seen the dollar increase significantly in the last few weeks to where we got to parity for the first time since essentially it started as a currency. So essentially, the question is, will the dollar continue moving up or will the euro start to recover? And you can answer the question right there in the polls, and then we can...
We've got a number of people coming in. It's pretty neck and neck at this point, but we'll give it a minute or so for everyone to put their answers in, and then we'll sort of share the results. But let me throw it back to you, Brian. What do you think the outcome of the poll is going to be?
Well, I think it will be a 50-50 type of result, but you know where my opinion lies, and the fun part is that Cam is our lead analyst, just so you guys know. So whenever you get those great infographics from us, he started doing these 3-pagers that are just chock full of information. That's who's putting those together. And what I love about Cam is sometimes we disagree on things, but that doesn't mean that one's right and one's wrong. It just means that there's different views on things. I tend to think that essentially we should continue to see the dollar increasing until inflation is no longer a topic. And it looks like the majority of the crowd, 2/3 of them, agree with me. Now, my simplistic view on this is that historically currencies are driven by 3 factors: monetary policy, fiscal policy, and growth rates. Right now, nobody cares about anything except for where monetary policy lies, i.e. where interest rates are actually moving. Now, you've heard me say this before. It was in our newsletter the other day, but I'll repeat it, and it just because it's a cheap joke. Whenever we have interest rates moving up, the US normally goes first, the lapdog in the UK goes second, Europe goes third, Japan fourth, and when China does it, we all call them currency manipulators. That's the typical order of who increases their interest rates first. And the simple reason why is because the United States makes up 19% of the world's GDP. And by making up 19% of the world's GDP, if others are trying to move their interest rates at the same time, they're not going to be able to budge anything. They're not going to actually be able to move their interest rates in the same way that they'd like to. So they let them go in order for those results. Now, when we look at it the US has increased the most, the UK the second most, Europe the third, Japan is staying pegged at 0.25%, and the renminbi is still pegged at 6.8 to the dollar. In other words, that waterfall continues to be the case. And in simple forms, if you can get a higher interest rate in the US, people move their money. Not necessarily people like you and I. I'm talking the big institutions that have billions and billions of dollars of cash. They can go ahead and move it into dollars, earn interest, and go ahead and use a forward contract to reduce that risk of the currency exchange, but earn interest instead of getting the negative interest that they would in euros. That is why I think we're going to still get a few more interest rate hikes to curb this inflation, which means that we'll continue to see more of a movement into US dollars and the higher US dollar from that vantage point. But it's not a high conviction vantage point on there. It's just not calling bottom to the euro.
Well, I'm really thrilled to hear this news because the closer we get to parity, the easier and less expensive it is for people to buy property in France.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes. Okay. I'm keeping my fingers crossed, Brian, that you're right.
Perfect. So why don't we jump into just a little bit of a history of currencies, of the US dollar and euro. Essentially, what we want to look at is not just the euro, because the euro has been around 22 years, Cam. I think it's right around there.
Yep, about 22 years.
But we had what was called the ECU before that, the European currency unit, which was basically a metric to try to figure out what euros should be sitting at. Now, essentially, what you'll basically see is everything on the right essentially push down the dollar. Sorry, we're getting some movement because the dog's moving around tables. So essentially, when Bretton Woods standards were collapsed, essentially what happened was the dollar went down, right? Because we were no longer pegged to the gold standard. Then in the 1980s, when interest rates went up, here's the commonality to now, naturally people flocked into dollars for the higher currencies. Then we had some Plaza Accords, which essentially weakened the dollar because essentially there were stronger unions, or the buildings of stronger unions over in Europe, which led to the Louvre Accords. So all of these types of things, again, weaken the dollars. Now, what you're noticing is there's a 10 to 15 year period between these dollars up and the dollar down. We go to the next page, Cam. What we can see is, well, we had the dot-com boom. Everybody flocked to the dollar because that was what was attractive to buy for investments. Then the birth of the euro, an expanded union, once again, just like the Plaza Accords, and that led to euro strength, or essentially non-US dollar strength. Financial crisis, essentially, we have this constant 10 to 15 years, as you can see, where we're having dollar strength, then dollar weakness. Now, fast forward, we've had 14 years of dollar strength. First, the financial crisis led us to essentially a period where people flocked towards safety. Then, essentially, we flocked even further to safety because of the Eurozone crisis. COVID led to even more, and now increased interest rates even further. So what are we saying? We're saying this is going to continue to be on the strength of the dollar, but it's not going to last that long. We know that the dollar is expensive. It will continue to be expensive until things normalize. So how do we value currencies? We'll give you the tongue-in-cheek way of looking at the purchasing power parity, which is, purchasing power index, which is the McDonald's index. So if we go to the next slide, the Big Mac index is a way to gauge what the price of a Big Mac is over the course of time. So we have this nice little graphic showing you the prices of every single different country. And what you'll notice is in the last about 14, 15 years, it's really been the Scandinavian countries, Switzerland and the US, that have been really right at the top.
I love this chart. It's hilarious. Okay, it makes me want to eat a Big Mac. Haven't had one in I don't know how many years. Sorry, Brian, keep going.
That's where I have bad news for you, Adrian, because yesterday, McDonald's raised the price of a Big Mac for the first time in 14 years.
What?
I know. This is where inflation is really becoming ridiculous, when a Big Mac becomes more expensive. The importance of this is not the pricing of Big Macs. It's basically, how do you gauge what money is worth and which ones are expensive and which ones are cheap? And essentially, what we've really had is the last couple of years, Scandinavia, Switzerland, and the US are the only expensive currencies. Everything else is relatively cheap. As things normalize from the pandemic, from the financial crisis, and essentially now, most importantly, from inflation, what we're going to see is people flocking out of dollars and going into other currencies. And that's where, with the next slide, what you'll really see is that valuation is quite high on the dollar. Yeah, that was the next slide, not the 10 slides.
There's a bit of a delay there, some technical issues.
Cam's no Vanna White. He's the analyst, not the Vanna White. So essentially here you see the price differential. We're looking at a 7.5% overvaluation of the US dollar to the euro. So this is where you can easily make the argument that the euro should recover in short order if all else is equal. If Europe is able to increase interest rates at the same speed that the United States is, you'll see that movement of the euro moving up. So the third of the audience saying we should get a rebound in the euro. That's why you're correct. In the short order, if interest rates continue to go up, basically it could go 5 to 10% higher, right? Now, to where if you're fully invested, I don't mind whether you're sitting on each side of the fence, is because in simple order, if the economy doesn't go deep into a recession, it's because things are normalizing, and that would push up the euro, right? Whereas if it doesn't, the dollar will continue to go up in short order. And most every portfolio, even in our euro and GBP portfolios, we're sitting at 50 or 60% US dollars in our portfolio. So we'll do just fine. So in a beautiful scenario, we're in a win-win situation as long as you're invested in certain regards, and we don't have to over-concentrate on that. So before we push it over to Social Security, I do want to actually tackle John's question. If you want to take advantage of the Euro USD exchange rate and move and transfer some US dollars to euros, well, how you make the position on that real estate, there's a few different ways that you can actually play this. First of all, if you might be borrowing money, you might want to find ways to borrow money earlier for those bridge loans in euros and buy it in those types of formats. A little bit harder than it was a decade ago, but something that might be in order through a private bank or the likes. The second strategy is potentially to buy a forward contract. And we've had some conversations of this on some of these webinars. So you can search through some of those, any of them that we're talking to Money Corp. You'll be able to find those, and otherwise we can connect you with the right people to building forward contracts so that you can lock it in with only a small deposit there. In other words, typically on a forward contract, you'll put 5 to 10% down so that you own those rates in euros, but essentially you're able to leave the other 95 or 90% in deposit accounts in US dollars. Now, if the dollar goes up, basically you're losing some of that value. You're still buying in at that price a year from now or 2 years from now. But if it goes down, then essentially you've locked in that better price at this point in time. So if you're looking for the insurance, but you want to gain the interest in between buying the real estate, that might be a nice strategy. So there's a lot of good strategies depending on your situation. If you're looking just to speculate, then probably this isn't the right channel. But if you're looking to just make sure that your financial plan is intact and build a strategy, then we can definitely help you out with that.
Brian, I have a question for you, which is actually a personal question. It's been on my to-do list for a while, but it's applicable because I was thinking that maybe this is a good time for me, for instance, to pay off my mortgages or some of them. So how does that play out for, for people taking mortgages or for people who have mortgages? And what would you recommend?
That is a brilliant question. So thank you. I didn't even give you that question beforehand to ask.
No, you didn't. This is for me, really on my list of questions.
Absolutely. So I think there's several questions that need to be asked on that. It's not universally you should pay down your debt. Now, if you have a variable mortgage, there's probably a better reason to go ahead and do so, because with interest rates going up, you're paying more at this point in time. So in my mind, it becomes one of those factors that when you're paying 4 or 5% on a mortgage, maybe it's better to pay it off than have it invested in a moderate portfolio. But if we're in more of a growth portfolio and you have a fixed rate, especially if you have a great interest rate, say 1, 2, or 3%, like some of you have on your European mortgages, well, we would expect much better than 1 or 2% on our returns inside of our portfolios. Therefore, we'd rather be working on the bank's money rather than our own. So it depends on the different situations and the different mortgages and which currency we have our cash in and which currency we have our debt in. Just so you know, on the US system, we go on a 3-pillar system, which is essentially we have our Social Security, we have our corporate pension, so your 401ks and your personal savings. Typically, they're about a third, and that should make up your retirement. In France, they'll think about financial planning a little bit differently, to where they'll have a 4th pillar, which is that you should pay off your mortgage before you get to retirement so that you have one less expense. One's not right and one's not wrong. It's just preference. And so if the goal is to get it paid off, this might be the opportunity if you're sitting on dollars. If you don't mind and you've got cheap enough debt, I would keep on using the bank's money.
Well, you and I are going to talk, okay? Because
we always do.
Yes, no. But because when I took these mortgages, they were variables, because at the time the interest rates were much higher and variable was smart. I've gotten notices from my bank that my interest rate has gone down to like 0.75, which is insane. Exactly. So clearly for someone like me, it does make sense to pay off the mortgage at this time, doesn't it?
Well, not until they start moving it up to a rate that we don't like paying that interest. Paying 0.75 and having the money in the market. So for instance, if we take our typical portfolio, our moderate growth portfolio, let's say for you, it has a dividend rate of, and Cam will probably tell me exactly, but around 3.7%. So now we don't mind that the value goes up and down, just like if we owned a house, we don't mind that the house goes up and down in value. The rent that we're receiving is actually quite high, and that's 3.7 or so, right? So if we're getting 3.7 in dividends, and yet we're only paying 0.75, why would we sell part of the portfolio to pay down to 0.75? But as you said, it is a variable interest rate. So if that gets to 2, 3, 4, 5%, that's when we really want to discuss, wait a second, we can't pay from the dividends, the actual interest, maybe we pay it down and be done with it.
As long as we're still at parity or close to parity, then it makes sense.
Well, we're going to still have a diversified portfolio of different currencies. So essentially, we're going to increase our non-US when we actually feel that the dollar is totally topped out. When Cam and I are both agreeing that basically the dollar has topped and we're going down, that's when we're going to go ahead and we're going to be increasing 5 or 10% more of non-US securities. But even right now, we have nearly 40% of our portfolio in non-US. That is one of the key factors of how we invest a little differently than a US carrier.
Okay, well, I hope I haven't taken up too much time with my personal question.
No, I love those. Those were perfect questions, and I think you answered a lot of the audience's questions.
I'm just going to expand a little bit there on the parity situation, if you don't mind, Brian. So naturally, we're probably both in agreement that the US dollar is a little expensive now. The only disagreement is, well, can it go further from here? How about we throw the question the other way around, which is when and eventually, when the US dollar does decide to to come back down to reality and back down to its historical averages. Which sectors of the market in general or regions do much better when you have a weaker dollar environment?
Well, essentially, you're going to get the full segment of S&P 500 companies that are going to do quite well because nearly 50% of their revenue comes from abroad. But naturally, if we go out of the utilities and comms companies that are all US, they're not going to perform so well. Now, I would assume that essentially the dollar will start coming down when inflation comes under control, which from the looks of the commodity markets looks like it's starting to take place. What are we, 25% from the tops on the commodity markets?
I think we're, about 35% now off the all-time highs from a lot of the commodities, whether it's oil, wheat, iron ore, whatever you're looking at, most of them are down.
If commodities are starting to come down, we'd expect inflation to come down. We're not really seeing it in the numbers just yet, but we'd expect it to happen. And especially with that good news that we had between Ukraine and Russia on Friday, if that can really come about, we'll see that continue. Now, if the commodity markets really come down and inflation comes down, then we won't see interest rates rising so much. Therefore, the dollar would go down instead of up, which is really great news. But that means the best performers this year would probably be going down. And that best performer are those dirty oil companies that did so well because of oil prices going through the roofs. So I would expect them to pull back at this point in time if that all plays out. I'm not playing this from a sector vantage point. I'm playing this from a currency vantage point. And that's to where I think once we have the conviction, which I would expect us to be down to 4 or 5% inflation by the end of the year. No guarantee on that. That's just my inkling on it based on where commodity prices are dragging us at this point in time. If we can get to that, then we're under control on the US side, and then the Bank of England and European Central Bank are going to be able to start increasing their interest rates, which will start the flow over to euros and pounds. So everything we're talking about, that flip of the switch is between now and probably the end of the year or beginning of next year.
Okay.
Should we move on to Social Security and let Josh and Anya might be able to jump in as well?
Let's do that. And maybe it's time for our second poll as we jump into Social Security. So why don't I throw up the poll, and in the meantime, Josh, Anya, take it away, I guess.
Absolutely. Okay, great. So thanks. So I'm Josh Madden, as Adrian had mentioned. So I'm here to talk with Anya to have a little discussion about Social Security. There's basically 4 key takeaways that we want to get into today, and that's when to take Social Security, where to take it, how to take it, and what about cases in which you worked in both countries. So those are sort of the key areas that we want to tackle here. So with that, Cam, if you'd be so kind, if you're able to go to the next slide. I know you have a poll there. Also,
well, why don't we answer that poll? Let's see. How did we do on this poll, Cam?
Let's get that up. So there we go.
I have a complaint. I'm not allowed to vote.
Yeah, well, we know you'd skew the whole thing. You'd take that to 96% because we already told you the answers and shared the slide deck with you. That's why we took away your vote.
All right, brilliant. So yeah, 95%. So yeah, I guess the vast majority of us are aware that we're eligible for Social Security while abroad, which is a great start. Now, just to give you sort of a brief bird's eye view, I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with the fact that you can begin to draw benefits at age 62. You can also choose to take them later, and that basically means that you get usually an 8% increase every year till you wait up to 70. Now, this is where I would want to ask Anya, maybe an obvious leading question. Does that mean you should always take it at a certain age, or where does this sort of come into play? How do we strategize that sort of thing?
Absolutely, Josh. That's a great question. It really, really depends on a couple of factors. The main one being, what do you estimate your life expectancy to be? And I know that's not an easy question, but that is key when taking Social Security.
Yeah, when am I going to die, Anya? Can you tell me?
Yes, I'm going to be the fortune teller here, Josh. In any case, I know this is a difficult question for a lot of us to answer, but we can definitely look up the bloodline and see how our family has done and what is our health history. But this really, if we're able to generally say, hey, I think I'm going to live till age 85 or 95 or 100 in some cases, we're going to have a really good idea of when to take Social Security. There's, of course, general guidelines around this. So as far as people with maybe shorter life expectancies, they may want to claim Social Security benefits sooner because they may not have enough years to collect it to comparing to taking it later versus taking it sooner. For couples maybe with longer life expectancies that have similar incomes, it might be wise to consider maximizing the benefits by delaying both benefits generally. And for those with big differences in earnings, for example, setting life expectancy aside, maybe it would be wise to consider spousal benefits. But it just really depends on everybody's individual situation. But I would say life expectancy is key. And then the second part of this from a financial planning perspective is, how does your cash flow look like? If we delay Social Security benefits to get that 8% growth, do we have the cash to cover our expenses, or do we really need to depend on Social Security? So those are the main factors to consider.
Mm-hmm. All right, brilliant. And is there a particular age at which we should be thinking about whether we want to be waiting till that maximum age or taking it sooner? Or can you give us a rough ballpark?
Well, you've got usually when clients ask us when to take it, they're usually close to their full retirement age. So if you're born after 1960, that would be age 67. But that's usually when most people are beginning to think about those kinds of topics. And we can certainly help by analyzing the details, looking at your cash flows, looking at those or discussing those life expectancies and modeling different scenarios.
Mm-hmm. All right, great. Now that kind of leads us into our next question. So if we've basically roughly decided, so when we're going to take it, so obviously the next question would be how to do it. So you've talked a bit about the spousal benefits and such, but maybe you could expound a bit on that, maybe give a concrete example of what we could be looking at when we're trying to determine these different strategies.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, so coordinating your benefits with spouses' benefits can really help both spouses get the most out of the Social Security payments. I mean, in certain cases, certain scenarios, it makes sense for both spouses to claim on the same person's earnings record. So for example, let's say we have a couple where they're both husband and wife aged 67. And to make it easy, let's just assume that based on their cash flow needs and life expectancies, we figured out that it's best to take Social Security at 67, their full retirement age. We'll make a few further assumptions to make it an easy example. Let's say the wife was the breadwinner in the family for her work life, and her Social Security benefit at 67 is $3,000 per month, whereas the husband's Social Security benefit would be about $800 per month. So instead of each of them taking their own benefit, the wife could claim hers at $3,000 a month, and the husband could claim spousal benefits or 50% of her benefit, which is $1,500 versus his $800. And in this scenario, that would help them maximize the total that they do receive from Social Security. When the husband takes half of wife's benefits, that does not affect her benefits. So in total, they get $4,500, and that's more than $3,800 they would have gotten if they didn't strategize this way.
Brilliant. So as I know you and Brian like to say, though, it's not always the case for everybody. This is just one of those conversations where these are things we want to make sure we consider when we look into these different aspects. Another point that is probably worth raising is regarding divorce benefits, right? I think people might assume that were you to be divorced, that means that you would be basically precluded from any benefits, but that's not necessarily the case, right?
Absolutely, Josh. Most people that I talk with think that if they're divorced, they're not eligible for the ex-spouse's benefits, which often is actually not the case. So if you've been married for at least 10 years, you're likely qualify for the benefits of your ex-spouse's earnings record. Now, in the most general terms, there's lots of rules around this, but generally you must remain unmarried to utilize the strategy. But it's definitely worth looking into if you were the lower earning spouse, because the benefit could potentially be significant. So a phone call, knowing the general guidelines, and later a phone call to the Social Security Administration is definitely well worth it.
I was just going to ask, how do I find out what my ex-husband's benefits are?
Great question, Adrian.
Right, since this webinar is perfect for me, okay? Because I'm about to, hit 70, take Social Security. I was married more than 10 years. I haven't remarried, so I fit that situation perfectly.
Aren't you glad you signed up today, Adrian?
Yes. But how do I find out what my ex-husband's benefits are?
Adrian, the best thing to do is to pick up the phone and call Social Security Administration. Don't call them on Monday. I hear the wait times are terrible.
Can we flash the number across the screen?
I love it. No call on Monday. Okay.
But it's definitely well worth it. So I'm glad that information was useful. And Adrian, you're definitely not alone. I would say 99% of people I talk with that have been divorced did not know that is an option for them. And oftentimes for the lower earning spouse, that's a great benefit.
So you get to basically choose either yours or your ex-spouse's. I mean, that's how that
Whichever
works.
is higher. That's it. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's going to be interesting to find out who actually earned more.
In the US, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, while the Social Security is taking away a lot of creative strategies for maximizing benefits, that divorce benefits are still the case, and spousal benefits are still in place. So there's still some strategies that we can utilize.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
And I think basically, just to give this a bit of color now, I think, Anya, this is where we would normally be talking to the estimated lifetime benefits. I believe that this is something that is available to people online, though I'm not sure if we have a link to that. If not, I'm sure we can provide it afterward. But I guess this is just an illustration of everything we've talked about, right? Where these different scenarios can lead to the different outcomes in terms of how to maximize our benefits.
Absolutely. This is just an illustration of how we would look at a case scenario where we know exactly what your ages are, what are your benefits, and we really strategize how to maximize the benefit. In this example, we're just using ages 85 and 95 to really illustrate the impact of life expectancy. And of course, the longer you live, the more you're going to receive from Social Security. That's the bottom line. But really the question becomes, what's your cash flow like? When do you really need to take it? And truly, what are the chances you're going to live to 85 versus 95? So we certainly help you make those determinations, help clients make those determinations as they consider different strategies.
Absolutely.
That was Nala acknowledging how great that information is.
Yeah, and that also does sort of lead on to the next point in terms of we talk about what your cash flow is like, but we also need to look at just where everything is in terms of where you want to receive Social Security. Now, it might not be widely known that you can also be receiving these benefits, not necessarily just in USD. You can just call up Social Security and have them send it to your local bank there in France and have it just sent in euro. But I think that really depends on where all the assets are. And Anya, maybe you can help me give a bit of color on that, but it largely depends on if you have more in France or in the US, or if you had any sort of concrete example on that.
I would just say that if you are living outside of the US, it might definitely be well worth it to inquire about getting your benefits in your home currency, so likely the euro. But it is also worth checking in with your bank if you haven't gone that route and you're just going to receive your benefits where your bank is going to convert the currency for you. Just check in with them to see if they have any additional charges for receiving direct Social Security payments in US dollars. It's definitely a better strategy to contact the Social Security Administration and inquire about just getting your benefits in euros where they can convert that for you. Just a little bit of research can just make your life a lot easier when receiving those benefits abroad.
And I suppose if it's the case, like, for example, if you have a house in the US but living in France, it might not necessarily be advantageous to receive it in euro just to convert it back to dollars. Maybe not, just one of those things to consider, right? One of those aspects we want to take into account when we're looking at sort of the whole picture.
Well, and I have a question on that because, I mean, I know that, we have a lot of clients who, of course, are living off their Social Security and they're here in France. So it would make sense for them to have it converted, by the Social Security Administration and sent to their French bank account. But with the rate of exchange the way it is, you could almost play that game as well, right? Because maybe it's more advantageous to put it in dollars and hold it until the dollars are even worth more. I don't know.
Well, that gets into speculation, and that's where I would be careful on that, because essentially you're going to be right. Sometimes you're going to be wrong other times.
Right.
I think what Josh was alluding to was get the money where essentially you need to spend it,
right?
And minimize the costs of doing so. In other words, if the Social Security Administration sends it to you in euros, they don't charge any conversion costs.
Right.
So we don't have to worry about that. And they don't charge any international wire fees.
Right.
So now it's in euros. Sometimes you're going to get a little bit worse price, sometimes a little bit better price, just based on where the euro dollar is. But essentially, if you have your expenses in the US, go ahead and have it sent over there because, well, you'll use the funds over there and then you're not going to have to convert it back. So marry it to your needs instead of trying to speculate the dollar to the euro.
Okay.
All right, cool. So the last thing that we wanted to touch on is the fact that, so a lot of us haven't necessarily spent our entire careers working in just one country, obviously.
How did you know that?
I just have this knowledge, that's why they brought me on.
He read your case file, Adrian.
Yeah.
That's it. This was meant for me.
Yeah. I'm what they call a big knower of stuff, is the technical term. I think you'll find. So if we don't have our quarters in the US or in France, well, the good news is there are things like the windfall elimination provision. So in other words, there's a way that we can make sure that we do sort of get the benefit of both of these country systems, even though we don't necessarily have the full quarters in either one. It's designed to just
that's the totalization agreement. Let's not confuse that. The windfall elimination provision is the other diameter. So on top of your double taxation agreement, where basically you can eliminate certain taxes in one and pay it in the other, which most of you, if you have US Social Security, will only have to pay in the US. You'll report it in France, but you won't pay tax in France. The totalization agreement is a separate agreement, right? And that separate agreement basically states that even if you don't get to 40 credits, which typically in the US, you get 4 credits a year if you made enough money. So it'd be 10 years worth of service with 4 credits per year. Even if you don't make it to those 40 credits, if you're in a country and worked in a country that has a totalization agreement with the United States, you'll still get a fractional payment from the United States. It won't be as much as if you worked your entire career in the US, but it doesn't matter. You'll still get the payment even though you didn't hit those 40 credit hours. And France, same thing, vice versa. So that's one of those key advantages on the totalization agreements that you want to take advantage of. But Josh, do you think Social Security knows that you lived in France and paid taxes in France or Social Security in France?
I don't think they're omniscient, no. I think this is one of those aspects where you want to make sure either way that you keep very good documentation of exactly where you've worked. I mean, the clients that we have, we definitely encourage them to do things like we have a vault feature that they put all the documents in there just so we can keep track of, and they can keep track of everything over time so that they're best prepared and best organized to be able to provide these things to the Social Security Service in the US, just to make things as organized as possible so it's not a huge mess, basically. So the better documentation you have, the smoother the process will be. And then, well, we can just take full advantage of it despite not having all of our benefits there in the US.
Now,
Okay, I'm definitely going to be talking to you guys very soon about this because my situation's complicated. I will not bore this audience with that, but this is so helpful. It's amazing.
so now with the windfall elimination provision, I'm going to ask a question. If anybody's ever heard of AARO, Association of American Residents Overseas, they're based right there in Paris with you guys. You've heard of them, Adrian. Actually, I think you know some of the key members over there.
Oh, yeah.
They're big on trying to push for the government to get rid of this windfall elimination provision. So if this becomes really confusing, go join AARO and back the fight of getting rid of the WEP just so that you don't have to actually listen to us talk about it. I'll let you take it away from of what it is, Josh.
Well, we certainly don't want to lose our benefits.
Well, let's
mean,
hear what Josh has to say before we start complaining. Pipe down, peanut gallery.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess, yeah, like you said, the downfall, I guess the downside of that would be that you wouldn't be able to get the full benefit, I suppose. Although I guess for most cases, you're generally looking at about $400 that will be less on the US side. But at the same time, the plus side, we are able to get the benefits on the French side as well, although it may not always be necessarily the same in that case. I think that we talked a bit about that earlier, didn't we?
Yeah, so one of the key aspects of the windfall elimination provision, if you spent half of your career in the States and half of your career in France, well, your US Social Security will probably be reduced, like Josh said, ballpark $400. But if you want the exact numbers, they have a calculator on the Social Security website, and you can plug in each of your years, and it will give you the exact number that you would expect from the WEP. So you don't even have to give them a call. The calculator's right there on their website. Now, the French side, French Social Security tends historically to be a little bit less for the same wages, but you're getting much more from those, i.e. health benefits and the likes. So essentially, yeah, you might get a little bit less than if you work the entire time on the US side from that vantage point. Now, to me, the key indicator here is if you're going to move to France and work just a couple years to where that would institute the WEP, you want to really consider that in your financial plan because it would reduce significantly your US Social Security, but you'd get very little from the French side. So that's where you want to be very, very careful that you think through those types of strategies. In other words, you might want to keep yourself on the US payroll or the likes. Being aware of the WEP is more important than anything else, and supporting those organizations that are helping to try to eliminate these AROs, a member just as we are, and Adrian, I believe you are as well, of the Residency-Based Taxation Initiative to do away with it. So make sure that you're vocal to these organizations, because that's what we're doing, is supporting eliminating these issues.
Okay.
Well, now should we jump into some Q&A? Oh, actually, I'm sorry, I left out your nice guides.
Yeah, I think Anya, I think you had a big hand in the guide to Social Security. So could you take us a bit through that and where we can all find that?
Absolutely. Don't give me all the credit, Josh. You did too. We as a team put that together to make it a little bit easier to understand the benefits, and it gives you a little bit more insight on the topics that we talked about today, plus a few additional pieces of information. And so this is something that we can definitely share following this webinar, but we hope you find it helpful as we organize this information for those that are getting close, like Adrian, that are getting close to potentially drawing the benefits. So we'll be sure to share this.
Lord, now I can't wait.
Perfect. Well, Adrian, you want to take us through some questions or some more of your questions?
More of mine?
Well, I think we have a slew in the chat.
No, let's hear from the people out there.
Perfect. What do we have here for questions?
Should we start from the top?
Let's see. Oh, how does the current political instability in the US affect the dollar? Here's the funny thing. We have just as much instability over here in Europe as we do back in the States. And really right now, now this is a purely an opinion vantage point. Essentially, everybody's just concentrated on interest rates and inflation. That's what's moving the markets. Today, the markets are up because of the OPEC plus announcement. You know, naturally, if we have more supply of oil, that means commodity prices should go down a little bit, even though 100,000 barrels of, is not significant. But essentially, I'm pointing at a TV that's got Bloomberg on, just so you don't think I'm pointing at the sky. Essentially, it all plays into inflation that gets to interest rates, which is moving the markets. So the politics right now are not a big deal. What do we got next?
So John Peter says, is there any recommended ways to have income categorized so it avoids being counted against your Social Security between 62 and full retirement age?
Let's not get into tax questions because that will be better to have with Jonathan and such. So John, we'll answer that offline and we'll loop in Jonathan and such.
Okay. Now, okay. Don Russell say, hello, Don. I'm already collecting Social Security. Does the age when my wife begins collecting have any impact on my Social Security?
Only if you die, Don. So please don't do that and don't impact it. And as you can see, Anya's even smiling at that one, which morbidity jokes are not really the forte there. The strategy is going to be when she would start taking, and that is a perfect thing that if you jump on the phone with Josh or Anya, they'll be able to take you through that graph that made me get dizzy because of all the different parameters, but they'll take you right down the proper angle of what the strategy should be based on your income, her income, and when you took it versus when she should take it. So brilliant question.
So we talked a bit about windfall provisions already. I think we may have already addressed that. In regards to paying off a mortgage early, shouldn't we consider the US mortgage interest deduction?
Yes, naturally, you're always wanting to optimize the tax, so therefore the interest rate would be considering that tax effect, but the general idea is still the same. If interest rates are low enough and you're yielding enough from those assets, then why not use the bank's money? But most definitely.
OPM, other people's money. That's what I call it.
Oh, I love it, Adrian. Our OG, our original gangster here in Adrian with their acronyms.
Come on, that's not me talking. That's that's common knowledge. OPM.
Okay. Best way to transfer US dollars to a French bank or service charges?
Oh, that's a brilliant question. We have a few articles on it. And it's also in our American Expat Guide, which we'll be following up this presentation with. Now, essentially, the banks charge a lot. Doesn't matter if it's on the French side or the US side. But you'll have service providers like Money Corp and Smarts. I know Adrian has several of those types of partners that are great if we're buying a big purchase, because you'll get a dedicated person that's going to help you. You can negotiate a little bit on rate to make sure that you get it down as much as possible. But really, if you deal with enough transactions and you're buying a $500,000, $1 million property, I definitely recommend using one of those, because if something goes wrong, you have somebody that can help you get it right. Now, if you're doing a smaller amount, $1,000, $5,000 or the such, and it's just on a regular basis, the TransferWises, the Revoluts, the Sterling Banks, these online platforms are a little bit cheaper at times on those smaller transactions than a Money Corp or such. They're designed for that.
I don't find that they are actually.
On the smaller amounts when you can't negotiate.
even on the smaller amounts, because even on the small amounts, they actually add pretty decent fees. And I do this comparison regularly, but I find that generally, if I'm working with one of the currency brokers like Money Corp or Currencies for You or OFX, which are the three that we have on our website, I generally get better service and better rate. Just
So what we've established here is that Adrian is a much better negotiator than I am. So therefore, when you're getting your rate, call Adrian and she will get you that best rate.
well, look, you know what I do? I check with TransferWise, for example, which is called Wise now, not TransferWise. And I see what rate I'm going to get without the fees. And then when I call Money Corp and I say, you know, I just checked with Wise and this is what they gave me. And I can usually get them to match it or do better.
That is very wise of you, Adrian. That is exactly what you want to do every single time.
Don't tell Money Corp I do that, okay?
This is Cam, you'll be able to cut that part out of the presentation,
I'm
right?
just joking. They do know I do it. It's, you know, it's fine. They want the business. That's how it works.
Well, we used to have a guy that he used to have his jazz channel on YouTube. So I'd have our clients call up with his jazz channel in the background. So you can play all the dirty tricks you want, right, Adrian?
They're not dirty tricks. I take offense.
Shall we move on before I say anything more silly?
Yes.
All right, so Patrick's question, can one split 50-50, as in a 50% purchase in euro, the other 50% in USD?
For your Social Security.
I believe that's what he's referring to.
Yeah. Patrick, that's a wonderful question. And I don't know the answer, to be honest with you. I've never actually had that case happen, but a simple phone call to the Social Security Administration would be able to clear that up. So I apologize. I've never stumbled upon that one.
Yeah, good question. All right, and then Jim, hey Jim, is having my Social Security delivered in France going to impact my 10,000 limit related to FATCA?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. So it's actually not FATCA, it's the F bar. So let's back up and kind of give that.
Isn't F bar part of the FATCA?
Yes, but it's your F bar reporting is what.
Right.
So what he's alluding to is that at any given time, if you aggregate all of your foreign bank accounts that you're a signature on, so those could include corporate accounts, or if you're on a charitable board, if you're working for a nonprofit, and all of your bank accounts that are outside of the United States, if at any given time they go over 10,000 US dollars, then you have to report all of them to the Treasury. It's not to the IRS, it's to the Treasury. So there's no tax on them. It's literally, you just have to report them. So if at any given time those go over $10,000, you do have to report them. So if your Social Security gets you over those limits, then yes, you would have to report those accounts.
And if you don't report them, there could be a fine of $10,000.
Exactly. And it's $10,000 per account per year. So you can actually get to fines that are larger than the values of the accounts, which we have seen historically in those types of things.
So it's not worth not reporting.
Always want to report everything.
Right. It's just the hardest part is determining what the most amount you had in the account at any one time, because you know you get a statement, but it's not like there's a running balance.
Exactly. So
can you get that changed? I mean, that is just one of those ridiculous rules.
Well, you know what's ridiculous? Nixon was the one that put that in place, but there's no inflation hedge on it. So it started as $10,000 and it's still $10,000.
Right. That's
so,
right.
Yeah, there are some of those silly provisions. That one probably won't change. Some of those are not on the panel for RBT, etc.
I was going to say, let's get this on the discussion of the expat organizations. Yeah.
What else do we have, Josh? We have a few in the chat.
Yeah, question. I am on Belgian pension, have a half-life pension for having worked for 20-40 years. I have only the minimum years in the USA. I will now be penalized by the USA. They will have my Social Security payments. Is there something I can do?
Well, it's not that you're really being penalized. You're just not getting paid for those years, and you're having the windfall elimination provision adapted on it. So you're getting the two, and they should amount to ballpark around the same as what you would get if you were just in the US during that time. So the good news is for that time period that you worked in Belgium, it keeps you from not getting the US pension. So there's a little bit of good news there.
Well, I'm going to have the same story. So
I cannot find the scroll bar. Thank you. Does Dunhill have offices in the US?
That's a great question. So currently what we have is we have a remote office down in Florida, and we have some partners in the US, some institutional partners. So if you're wanting to work with somebody that's in the US, but use our portfolios and our cross-border expertise, even our European and UK licenses, we have some partners over there, but it isn't the Dunhill financial office per se. But if you drop me an email after this, we can get to the roots of what you're looking for over there and most likely help you out.
And I think what is somewhat related to what we talked about with regards to the windfall elimination provision. Is there a minimum amount of time that makes sense working in France to get the benefits?
That's a big depends.
I knew it.
It's one of those questions that you get a phone call with Anya, because as you figured out, she is the expert on digging into these, and it's going to depend how much you make, how much you need to continue to save, and how much is going to go into those pensions. We don't want to answer that too quickly and easily, because we might direct you in the wrong way. So we'll direct you to the expert in Anya to reach out to her after this call.
we've got 3 minutes, guys.
Wow, we got to the end of the questions.
Almost did our job then.
I think we've done well.
Mm-hmm.
Adrian, did we answer all your questions?
No, but I'm always full of questions, and a lot of them are personal, so we wouldn't want to do that here. Anybody though who has a question, now's the time to throw it in there, because we're down to the last few minutes. And you guys might have something that you want to add to any of this.
Well, I'd love for you to tell them where we can meet up with them for maybe a glass of rosé in early September.
Oh, exactly. Brian is going to be speaking at our conference in September 16th, 17th, and 18th in Nice, along with a group of amazing experts to talk about everything related to buying property and living in France. So we invite everyone to join us for the conference. There's information on our website about it under the category under the menu item of events. And I think, Brian, you're also going to be speaking in Nice on the 14th for Democrats Abroad, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so, and then we're going to have our next webinar is, maybe Patty, you can look up the date of our 4th quarter. I don't have that at the top of on my fingertips.
When she jumps in there on that, we're going to be talking about some end of the year strategies, especially when it comes to tax, that you want to make sure you take care of before the end of the year. And we'll have some other vantage points, which we'll be able to predict whether I was right or Cam was right on currencies. And whoever's wrong has to buy the beers. Is that the deal, Cam?
Yep,
our next presentation is November 16th.
Okay,
Perfect.
we'll mark the calendar for that. So we've got September 14th in Nice, September 16th in Nice, November, what was it, Patty? November 16th also, okay, for the 4th quarter forum. And I'd like to thank everyone for being here. I certainly want to thank all of the panelists, Brian and Josh and Cam and Anya, for all your good information. This was so helpful. I learned so much. I have a whole slew of notes here, so I don't know about anybody else, but this was great for me.
Adrian, as always, thank you so much for hosting. Patty, wonderful seeing you as always, and thanks for co-hosting. We look forward to seeing everybody in person next month.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you, everybody.
And make sure to come stop by at the drinks session so that you get the honest answers.
Okay, and don't forget to watch the recording.
Great.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks again, everybody.
Good night,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Bye.